November 2nd, 1944. Somewhere over Czechoslovakia, Lieutenant Bruce Carr watches the oil pressure gauge on his P-51 Mustang drop to zero. Black smoke is pouring from the engine. The Merlin engine is screaming. Metal grinding against metal. Just 30 seconds ago, he was leading a strafing run against a German airfield. Now, he's a dead man flying. An 88mm shell fragment had punched through the engine and severed the oil line. Without oil, the Rolls-Royce Merlin will seize in about 90 seconds. After that, the propeller becomes a 400-pound anchor, and the P-51 becomes a glider with the aerodynamics of a brick. Carr has one option: bail out. He pulls back the canopy, rolls the dying Mustang upside down, and drops into the freezing sky. At 8,000 feet, his silk canopy deploys. Below him, enemy territory stretches to every horizon. He's 200 miles behind German lines. No radio. No weapon except a Colt .45 with 7 rounds. No food, no water. And it's November in Central Europe, with temperatures dropping below freezing at night. The math for survival is brutal. American pilots shot down over-occupied territory have a 23% chance of evading capture and returning to Allied lines. The other 77% end up in a POW camp or an unmarked grave. But Bruce Carr is about to become the exception to every statistic. Because in 4 days, he won't just escape. He'll steal one of the most advanced fighter aircraft in the German arsenal and fly it home. Bruce Carr was born in January 1924 in Union Springs, New York. There was nothing particularly remarkable about his childhood, except for one thing. At 15 years old, in 1939, Bruce Carr learned to fly, and that year matters. In September 1939, Germany invaded Poland, and World War II began. A 15-year-old farm kid in upstate New York couldn't have known that in 5 years. He'd be dogfighting Messerschmitts over Berlin, but some part of him must have sensed that flying was about to become the most important skill a young man could possess. He didn't learn in a military program or a formal school. A local crop duster named Earl let the kid take the controls of his biplane one summer afternoon, and Carr was hooked. By the time he turned 16, he had more stick time than most Army Air Corps cadets. On September 3, 1942, Carr enlists in the United States Army Air Forces. He's 18 years old. At the aviation cadet training program, his instructor turns out to be the same man who taught him to fly 3 years earlier. Earl had joined up to it. He takes one look at Carr's application, sees the 240 flight hours already logged, and recommends him for the accelerated program. By August 1943, Carr is a flight officer. By February 1944, he's in England, assigned to the 380th Fighter Squadron. His first assignment: fly the P-51 Mustang. The P-51 is arguably the finest propeller-driven fighter aircraft ever built. The numbers tell the story. A range of over 1,600 miles with drop tanks, enough to escort bombers from England to Berlin and back, at top speed of 437 miles per hour. An armament of 6 50 caliber machine guns with enough firepower to shred a German bomber in a 2-second burst. Before the P-51 arrived in numbers, American daylight bombing raids suffered catastrophic losses. Without fighter escort, the B-17s and B-24s were sitting ducks for Luftwaffe. Interceptors. The Mustang changed everything. For the first time, American fighters could accompany bombers all the way to the target and back. German pilots call them the long-nosed bastards. The Luftwaffe began losing experienced pilots faster than they could be replaced. Carr falls in love with the aircraft instantly. The cockpit fits him like a glove. The controls are responsive. The power intoxicating. He names his plane Angel's Playmate. He has no idea that in 8 months, he'll be sitting in a very different cockpit, one with German labels and a swastika on the tail. On March 8, 1944, Flight Officer Carr at his first combat engagement. He spots a Messerschmitt Bf 109 over Germany and gives chase. The German pilot tries to escape by diving for the deck, flying just above the treetop. Carr follows. The chase covers 40 miles at speeds over 400 miles per hour, both aircraft just barely clearing the German forests. Carr fires. His rounds miss. He fires again. One bullet clips the 109's wing. The German pilot panics. He pulls up and ejects, but he's too low. The parachute doesn't fully deploy, and the pilot hits the ground hard. The 109 crashes into a hillside. Carr returns to base, expecting congratulations. Instead, his commanding officer chews him out. "Carr, that was the most over-aggressive flying I've ever witnessed. You nearly killed yourself chasing that German into the trees. You're being transferred, and the kill doesn't even count." Technically, Carr didn't shoot the plane down. The pilot crashed it, trying to escape. This is the first sign that Bruce Carr doesn't think like other pilots. Where others see recklessness, he sees opportunity. Where others see limits, he just sees suggestions. In May 1944, Carr transfers to the 354th Fighter Group, the Pioneer Mustang Group. These are the best Mustang pilots in the war. Carr fits right in. On June 17th, 11 days after D-Day, he scores his first official kill. 2 months later, he makes second lieutenant. Then comes September 12th, 1944. Carr's flight is strafing a German airfield when they spot 30 FW-190s, 2,000 feet below them. Carr doesn't hesitate. Dives. In the next 3 minutes, he shoots down 3 German fighters. When his wingman takes damage, Carr escorts him all the way back to friendly territory, giving up more kills to protect his fellow pilot. For this, he earns the Silver Star, the second highest combat decoration for valor. Then, just a few weeks later, on October 29th, Carr leads his flight against a massive formation of over 150 German fighters. He shoots down 5 of them in a single engagement, becoming an ace in a day. He's awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. This is the man now dangling from a parachute over enemy territory. A decorated ace, a pilot who pushes every limit. He's not just any pilot. He's one of the best, and his incredible story is far from over. As he floats down towards the cold, hard ground of Czechoslovakia, his mind isn't on surrender. It's already working on a new plan. A plan so audacious, soon believably. It sounds like something straight out of a Hollywood movie. Bruce Carr was about to prove that for a pilot with his skill and nerve, the rules of war were merely a suggestion. The story of how he got back home is one of the most legendary tales of World War II. He was officially an ace. His name was Carr, and after downing to German Bf-109s, his confirmed kill count stood at 7.5. 4 days later, his luck ran out. November 2nd, 1944. The frozen ground of Czechoslovakia rushed up to meet him. The parachute landing was anything but gentle. His ankle twisted hard on impact. It wasn't broken, but the sprain was bad. He quickly gathered the silk canopy, burying it under a pile of leaves. The Germans would be searching for him. They always did. He figured he had 20 minutes, maybe less, before the patrols arrived. Carr knew the airfield he'd been strafing was about 5 miles to the north. He also knew the Germans would expect him to head south or west, toward the Allied lines. His survival depended on doing the unexpected. So, he turned and headed north, directly toward the enemy. The logic was counterintuitive, but it was sound. The Germans would search outward from his landing site, assuming he was running away. They'd never expect him to move closer to their base. And if he was going to survive, he needed supplies, food, water, maybe even a weapon. The airfield had all 3. On day 1, Carr moved through the forest, staying off the roads, traveling only at night. His flight suit offered minimal warmth against the biting cold, and his ankle throbbed with every single step. He hadn't eaten in 18 hours. By day 2, he found a stream and drank deeply. The water was so cold it numbed his throat. He spotted a German patrol about 200 yards away and lay motionless in a ditch for 2 long hours until they passed. Day 3. The hunger was becoming impossible to ignore. Carr was burning 4,000 calories a day just to stay warm, and he'd consumed 0. His body had started to cannibalize its own muscle tissue for energy. He made a decision. Tomorrow, he would surrender. The Luftwaffe was known to treat captured pilots better than the Wehrmacht or the SS aviators had a code. They respected fellow flyers, even the enemy. Carr knew pilots who'd spent time in Stalag Luft 3. They described it as boring, but survivable. 3 meals a day, Red Cross packages, letters from home. Its shoe beat starving to death in a Czechoslovakian forest. Late in the afternoon on day 4, Carr reached the edge of the German airfield. He positioned himself in a tree line, overlooking the eastern perimeter. Through the branches, he could see hangars, fuel trucks, and aircraft. He planned to wait until morning, then walk to the main gate with his hands in the air. But as darkness fell, Carr noticed something. A revetment, a protective embankment, stood just 80 yards from his position. Inside it, a Focke-Wulf Fw 190 sat partially concealed by camouflage netting. 2 German mechanics were working on the aircraft under portable lights. Carr watched them intently. They checked the fuel level full tanks. Then they ran up the engine. The distinctive roar of the BMW 801 radial engine echoed through the night air. They cycled the propeller, checked the magnetos, and ran through what looked like a complete pre-flight inspection. Finally, they shut it down, covered the cockpit, and walked back toward the main hangars. The Fw 190 was ready to fly. A wild idea began to form in Carr's mind. He'd never flown a German aircraft. He didn't speak a word of German. He had no idea where the controls were, how the engine started, or how the landing gear operated. But he knew how to fly. He had over 500 combat hours under his belt. Every aircraft has a throttle, a stick, and rudder pedals. The laws of physics don't change just because the labels are in a different language. And right in front of him was a fully fueled fighter aircraft with no one guarding it. The plan to surrender evaporated. Carr waited until 3 o'clock. A.M. The airfield was quiet, with only a skeleton crew on night watch. There was no activity near the revetment. He made his move. 80 yards of open ground, with no cover. If anyone looked in his direction, he was dead. Staying low, Carr covered the distance in 40 seconds, his twisted ankle screaming with every agonizing step. Up close, the Fw 190 was larger than he'd expected. It had a wingspan of 34 feet and was nearly a ton heavier than his P-51 Mustang. The cockpit sat high, protected by armored glass. The massive BMW 801 engine dominated the Noza 14C air-cooled radio beast, producing 1,700 horsepower. The Focke-Wulf Fw 190 was Germany's premier fighter. First deployed in 1941, it outclassed the British Spitfire so thoroughly that the British had to rush development of new variants just to compete. German pilots called it the Wurger, the butcher bird. Allied pilots just called it trouble. The aircraft Carr had just climbed into was likely an A8 variant, the most common model in late 1944. Its standard armament included 2 machine guns in the cowling and 4 20mm cannons in the wings. It was a deadly machine in the hands of an experienced pilot. Carr was not an experienced Fw 190 pilot. He'd never even sat in one before. Everything he knew about this aircraft came from gun camera footage of them exploding. He climbed onto the wing. The canopy was unlocked. He slid it back and dropped into the cockpit. The first thing he noticed was that he couldn't read a single thing. Every label, every gauge, every switch was in German. The instrument panel was a wall of incomprehensible Gothic script. The second thing he noticed was that the cockpit was smaller than a P-51's. His knees were pressed right up against the instrument panel, but the control stick fell naturally to his right hand, and the throttle was on the left, just like an American aircraft. Some things, it turned out, were universal. Carr had about 4 hours until sunrise, and he used every minute. He meticulously traced wiring looms. He identified gauges by their standard positions. Airspeed usually top left, altimeter top center. Engine instruments clustered on the right. He found the fuel selector, the magneto switches, and the propeller control. The starter was the critical piece of the puzzle. In the P-51, it was a simple electrical system. In the Fw 190, EAD, no idea. On the right side of the cockpit, he found a T-shaped handle with German text on it. The word looked vaguely like starter. He pulled it. Nothing happened. He pushed it. A mechanical whine filled the cockpit on inertia starter, winding up like an old toy. He let it spin for 10 seconds, then 20. Then he pulled the handle. The BMW 801 engine coughed, caught, and then roared to life. The noise was apocalyptic. 1,700 horsepower at idle still sounds like thunder. Every German on the airfield would have heard it. Carr had only seconds. There was no time to find the runway. He doesn't have time to check the brakes, the flaps, or the radio. He just shoves the throttle forward. The FW-190 lurches, its tail coming up almost immediately. This aircraft is nose-heavy, eager to fly. Through the pre-dawn darkness, Captain Bruce Carr aims between two hangars. Ground crew are emerging, shouting, pointing. 60 miles per hour, 70. The hangars rush toward him. At 90 miles per hour, Carr pulls back on the stick. The FW-190 leaps into the air, clearing the hangar roofs by what feels like inches, in a stolen German fighter, 200 miles behind enemy lines. And now comes the hard part. The FW-190's cockpit is a nightmare of unfamiliar systems. But Carr solves problems one at a time. First, the landing gear. He finds a lever on the left console and pulls it a satisfying thunk. The gear retracts, and the aircraft accelerates. Next, the compass. He identifies the gyro compass and orients himself west-southwest, toward France, toward Allied lines. He climbs to 500 feet, then thinks better of it. At that altitude, he's a sitting duck, visible to German radar, to German fighters, to Hermann, anti-aircraft batteries, tracking everything that moves. He drops to treetop level, 50 feet above the ground, screaming along at 280 miles per hour. The Czechoslovakian forest becomes a green blur beneath his wings. This is insane flying. One mistake, one moment of inattention, and he'll cartwheel through the trees at 300 miles per hour. But Doneri, at treetop level, he's invisible to radar. He's too low for flak. He's too fast for ground troops to target. The fuel gauge shows full tanks. The FW-190 has a range of about 500 miles. France is 200 miles away. He has a margin for error. For 45 minutes, Carr flies west. The sun rises behind him. The terrain changes from dense forest to open farmland, then to the scarred battlefields of eastern France. He finally crosses the front lines, and that's when his problems really begin. Allied anti-aircraft gunners see exactly what they expect to see. A German FW-190 flying at low altitude toward Allied positions. And they open fire. 50 caliber tracers arc toward Carr from every direction. He's taking fire from his own side. He has no radio to announce himself, no way to signal that he's friendly. The FW-190 still carries German markings. The black crosses on the wings, the swastika on the tail. Carr does the only thing he can do. He flies lower and faster. He drops to just 20 feet. Head-chopping. The propeller wash kicks up dust from the roads below. French civilians dive into ditches as he screams overhead. American soldiers fire rifles at him. Every gun in France is shooting at Bruce Carr. He later estimated that every 50 caliber machine gun in existence took shots at him during that 30-mile sprint to his home base. The FW-190 takes hits. He can hear the impacts, feel the shudders, but the German engineering holds. The aircraft keeps flying. Ahead, he recognizes the airfield, a 66, or Saint-Dizier, France, home of the 354th Fighter Group. He lines up for approach. No time for a standard pattern, no time for radio calls. The anti-aircraft batteries are already tracking him. That's when he discovers the final, critical problem. The landing gear won't come down. Carr pulls the lever. He looks for a backup system, an emergency release anything. He doesn't know that the FW-190's landing gear operates on hydraulic pressure, controlled by a selector valve. He doesn't know which lever controls that valve. He doesn't know that he's been pulling the wrong handle for the last 5 minutes. Below him, the 354th anti-aircraft crews are loading their 40mm Bofors guns. A German fighter is circling their field. They're preparing to blow him out of the sky. Carr makes a decision. He's going to belly land it. He lines up at the grass beside the main runway, lowers the flaps that, at least, he'd figured out and cuts the throttle. The FW-190 sinks 100 feet, 50 feet, 20. The aircraft hits the grass at 90 miles per hour, sliding for 300 yards, throwing up a rooster tail of mud and debris before grinding to a stop. Carr is alive within seconds. The FW-190 is surrounded. Military police, Reefless resaid, screaming at the pilot to get out of the cockpit. They're expecting a German prisoner. The canopy slides back. "I'm Captain Carr of this goddamn squadron," he yells. Nobody believes him. He's been missing for 4 days. He's supposed to be dead or captured, and he just belly landed a German fighter on their airfield. The MPs keep their rifles trained on him until a staff car arrives. Colonel George Bickle, commanding officer of the 354th Fighter Group. The story spreads through the Army Air Forces like wildfire. The pilot who stole a German plane, the only American in the European theater. Carr does a quick estimate. 60 aircraft, maybe more, a mix of Bf-109s and FW-190s. It's the largest concentration of German fighters he's ever seen, and he has just 4 P-51 Mustang. The German formation is massive, made up of the latest variants, Bf-109 G10s and FW-190 T9 South. Their pilots are relatively fresh. The Luftwaffe had been running out of experienced aviators since early 1940. For about 60 aircraft is 60 aircraft. Standard tactics dictate immediate evasion. 4 against 60 is suicide. The Germans have the altitude advantage, the numerical advantage, and the positional advantage. Every manual ever written says, disengage and report. Let the bomber escort squadrons know what's coming. Get out alive. But Bruce Carr has never been particularly interested in what the manuals say. He keys his radio. Engaging. His wingmen don't hesitate. They've flown with Carr before. They know that when Carr says engaging, he means it. The 4 Mustangs climb into the German formation. What happens next is one of the most remarkable air battles of World War II. The Germans don't expect an attack. Why would they? They see 4 lone Mustangs climbing towards them, and they probably assume it's a mistake. They're wrong. Carr and his wingmen tear into the formation with a ferocity that catches the Germans completely off guard. They use the element of surprise, hitting the enemy from below where they're least expected. The sky erupts into a chaotic ballet of twisting, turning fighters. Tracers from machine guns and cannons crisscross the air. Carr is a master of deflection shooting, leading his targets with uncanny precision. In the first pass, he downs a Bf-109, then another. His wingmen are just as deadly. The massive German formation, which should have overwhelmed him in seconds, fractures. Individual dogfights break out across a huge expanse of sky. For over 20 minutes, the 4 Americans fight against odds that should have been impossible. They dive, climb, and roll, supporting each other, calling out threats, and picking off German fighters one by one. Carr himself is a whirlwind of destruction. He's credited with shooting down 5 enemy aircraft in that single engagement, becoming an ace in a day. His wingmen claim another 10. In total, the 4 pilots of the 354th Fighter Group shoot down 15 German fighters without a single loss to themselves. The remaining German aircraft, their formation shattered and their morale broken, turn and flee. It was an unheard of victory, for pilots took on 60 and came out on top, not just surviving but decimating the enemy. Bruce Carr's actions that day, combined with his earlier escape in the stolen FW-190, cemented his status as a legend. He was a pilot who defied the odds, who wrote his own rules, and who embodied the daring spirit of the fighter pilots of World War II. He finished the war as a double ace, with 15.5 confirmed aerial victories. His incredible stories remind us of the courage and skill that defined a generation. Picture this: a sky filled with German fighters, 60 of them flying in a loose defensive formation, probably heading to intercept a bomber stream. Suddenly, 4 American fighters are seen climbing directly into their midst. It makes no tactical sense. The German pilots are confused, and in that confusion, one American pilot, First Lieutenant Bruce Carr, sees his chance. He slips into the back of the formation, positioning himself perfectly behind a Messerschmitt Bf 109. He fires. The German pilot never even sees him coming. The 109 explodes in a ball of flame. Carr immediately shifts to another target. An FAWE 190, just 3 seconds of 50 caliber fire, and the Focke-Wulf rolls inverted, plummeting toward the earth. The German formation begins to scatter. They're in chaos. They don't know how many Americans are attacking or where the fire is coming from. Carr moves through them like a wolf through a flock of sheep, picking his targets, firing, and moving on. A third kill, then a fourth, and then a fifth. In the space of just 3 minutes, Bruce Carr shoots down 5 German aircraft. His wingmen account for 10 more. The final tally: 4 American pilots, 15 German aircraft destroyed, and 0 American losses. When the ammunition runs out, Carr leads his flight home, leaving the surviving 45 German planes scattered across the countryside. This incredible feat happened on April 2nd, 1945. Just 1 week later, on April 9th, Bruce Carr was promoted to captain. For his actions that day, he was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, a meta second only to the Medal of Honor. The official citation reads, completely disregarding his personal safety and the enemy's overwhelming numerical superiority and tactical advantage of altitude, he led his element in a direct attack on the hostile force, personally destroying 5 enemy aircraft and damaging still another. With this action, Bruce Carr became the last American ace in a day in the European theater of World War II. No other American pilot would match his feat before Germany's surrender. By the war's end, he had flown 172 combat missions and accumulated 14 or 15 confirmed aéreo victories to records, slightly plus numerous ground kills, and he was just 21 years old. When the war ended, Bruce Carr didn't hang up his flight suit. He stayed in uniform and joined the Acrojets, America's first jet aerobatic demonstration team, flying the F-80 Shooting Star. Then came the Korean War, where he flew 57 combat missions in the legendary F-86 Saberjet with the 336th Fighter Interceptor Squadron. He even went on to command that very squadron from 1955 to 1956, with Colonel's eagles on his shoulders. The kid from a small town in New York was now running a fighter squadron. But his story doesn't end there. Next was Vietnam. Colonel Carr, now 44 years old, flew a staggering 286 combat missions in the F-10 Super Sabre. He was doing close air support, bombing runs, and strafing mission sites. Same kind of dangerous work he did 24 years earlier, just in a different war, in a different aircraft. Think about that. 3 wars, 3 different generations of aircraft, and a grand total of 515 combat missions. He finally retired in 1973. On April 25th, 1998, in St. Cloud, Florida. Bruce Carr passed away from prostate cancer at the age of 74. He was buried in Arlington National Cemetery, Section 64, grave 6922. Among the heroes of every American war since the Revolution, his final resting place is within sight of the tomb of the unknown soldier, just across the river from the Lincoln Memorial. His headstone lists his rank: Colonel, United States Air Force. It lists his decorations: the Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, Legion of Merit, Distinguished Flying Cross, Air Medal, and Purple Heart. It lists his wars: World War II, Korea, Vietnam. But some stories are too big to fit on a headstone. There are 2 ways to tell the story of Bruce Carr. The first is the legend. It's the story of a downed pilot who, deep behind enemy lines, stole a German fighter plane from an active airfield. He figured out the controls by trial and error and flew 200 miles bike to Allied territory while it seemed like every gun in Europe was shooting at him. The second is the documented record. It's the story of the A's with 15 kills, the Silver Star recipient. The man who won the Distinguished Service Cross by leading 4 aircraft against 60 and coming out on top. Both of these stories are true. Both are absolutely remarkable. But here's what truly matters. In November 1944, an American pilot found himself alone, unarmed, and stranded 200 miles behind enemy lines. The rational choice was to surrender. The safe choice was to give up. But Bruce Carr chose differently. He looked at that German fighter aircraft, covered in unfamiliar instruments, with labels in a language he couldn't read, and he didn't see an obstacle. He saw an opportunity. He climbed into a cockpit he'd never seen before, started an engine he'd never operated, and flew an aircraft he'd never touched. Not because he was reckless, but because he refused to accept that his options were limited to only what seemed possible. 4 months later, faced with those 60 enemy fighters against his 4 friendly aircraft, he made the same kind of calculation. The rational choice was to retreat. The safe choice was survival. He chose to attack. And because he did, 15 German pilots never made it home that day. In 1997, just a year before he passed away, Colonel Carr flew one more time. He was invited to an air show at the Fantasy of Flight Museum in Florida. Carr, now 73 years old, arrived in his own P-51 Mustang, which he had kept in perfect flying condition. He roared in over the crowd at 300 knots, just 50 feet off the deck. It was the same aggressive approach Deus had more than 50 years earlier when he flew that stolen German Focke-Wulf into a French airfield while his own side tried to shoot him down. Some things, it seems, never change. The crowd watched in awe as this 73-year-old man threw a World War II fighter through maneuvers that would challenge pilots half his age. Loops, rolls, high G turns that pressed him into his seat with forces that would make younger men black out. When they landed, someone asked him what he was thinking up there in the sky. He just shrugged and said, "Same thing. I was always thinking. What's the airplane capable of? What am I capable of? Let's find out." That, right there, is the true Bruce Carr story. It's not just about the stolen fighter or the 15 kills. It's not just about the 3 wars and 515 combat missions. The story is simpler, and yet so much more powerful. It's the story of a pilot who, when faced with impossible odds, simply asked, "What else can I do?" Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story of incredible courage and determination, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more. We'll see you next time.